everybody. Welcome to today's podcast on framing, how authors frame their story to show readers the message. So what is framing? Framing is using the same scene or element at both the beginning and end of a text. It's kind of like putting a frame around a picture, and how a frame covers each side of the picture. That's similar to how framing in a book covers both sides of the story, the sides in a story being basically the beginning and the end of the story. All right, let's look at a literary example. This comes from a story called Chrysanthemum, and this is the first page of this children's book. And it says, Chrysanthemum thought her name was absolutely perfect, and then she started school. The text at the bottom is less important. The picture itself is of a little mouse. She's leaping, she's outside, she's clearly happy. I can tell that because of the way that her face is framed, the way that she's got her eyes closed and she's smiling gleefully. Her chin is elevated. She looks happy. Now we're going to move to the end of the book. So this was the first page of the story, and now this is the last page of the story. And it says, Chrysanthemum did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She knew it. And I want you to make notice of the way that her face is pictured here also. All right. So what framing did you see in Chrysanthemum? Well, first, there were similar elements in the picture. The way her head was, the way her eyes were, the way her smile was, the way she's leaping in both of the pictures, those were similar elements. There were similar elements in the word choice. On the first page, it had said, Chrysanthemum thought her name was perfect. And on the last page, it said, Chrysanthemum knew her name was perfect. So those were similarities. All right, super quick, I wanted to just mention a couple of different ways to say framing. You can say bookend. An author bookends a story, which means that they put the same thing at the beginning and the end, just like bookends hold books at the beginning or the end of a shelf. So it's kind of like framing. There's something at the beginning, there's something at the end. They're very similar. So you can call this element in literature bookending in the same way you can call it framing. And another way to talk about it is to call it full circle. So an author comes full circle in their book by ending the book in the same place or with the same idea where they began it. Kind of like when you draw a full circle and your pen finishes the circle in the same spot where it started. Okay, so why is framing important? It's important because authors create frames in order to give the reader clues about the theme, which, as we have already talked about, is the most important message that they're going to send you. It's what they're trying to say about all people. Remember, it's the author's comment on the human condition. It usually involves a crucial or really important scene. And finally, it provides resolution to that crucial scene. So something changes in the end of the frame that provides some resolution or some closure to that scene. Let's look at an example from Of Mice and Men. If you know this story, you know that there's these two guys. George is the guy in the dark hat, and Lenny is his friend in the blue cap. And George and Lenny are living in a depression time, so late 1920s, early 1930s, and they're traveling from farm to try and get work. And Lenny is mentally incapacitated. He doesn't have the same cognitive abilities as normal grown-up men. And so George kind of takes care of him. So at one point, at the beginning of the book, right here in the first chapter, they come to a farm and they stop at a clearing just outside a farm where they're planning to work. And here's what happens. George says, "Look, Lenny, I want you to look around here. You can remember this place, can't you?" "Sure," said Lenny. "I can remember this." "Well, look, Lenny, if you just happen to get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush till I come for you. Can you remember that?" "Sure I can, George. Hide in the brush till you come." So let me point out the elements of the initial frame. You've got your two characters and you've got a setting. So they are set in a clearing, and in this scene, George is taking care of Lenny. He wants him to know that should any trouble come, he should come right back here to this brush, and George will pick him up in this spot. George will take care of him. Now, if you move to the last chapter, in the final chapter, sure enough, Lenny gets in trouble. He ends up inadvertently killing a woman. And so he finds his way back to this little clearing. And it says, "Suddenly, Lenny appeared out of the brush. He said softly, "I didn't forget, you bet, goddamn. Hide in the brush and wait for George." He pulled his hat down low over his eyes. "George gonna give me hell," he said. "George gonna wish he was alone and not have me bothering him." So what happens in this end scene, the frame is that he returns back to this very similar clearing. And just like George had promised, George shows up. So you've got the two characters and the setting. And the frame is that at the beginning, it established that George takes care of Lenny. And in the end, in this final chapter, what you end up finding out is that George continues to take care of Lenny. Only this time, the way he has to take care of him is to kill him, because there's a whole mob of men that are after him and they're going to kill him. And George feels like it's his duty, because Lenny is kind of his family. It's his duty to do the killing instead of allowing the mob to get a hold of Lenny. So the frame is really the same idea about taking care of somebody, but the key is that in this case, he's taking care of him to the extent that he goes ahead and kills him. So, in Of Mice and Men, you should ask yourself these questions. Does the framing give the reader clues to the theme, or what the author's trying to say about all people? Yes, the author is very clearly saying something about our responsibility to take care of the people that we consider our family. Does the framing involve a crucial or really important scene? Well, yeah. The beginning sets up the fact that George takes care of his brother, and the ending scene sets up the fact that George has to ultimately kill him. And then finally, does the framing or full circle provide resolution to the crucial scene? Yes. When George kills Lenny, that provides the resolution about how we take care of the people that are close to us. Okay, so how do I recognize a frame when I read a text? That's a really great question. The key to recognizing framing is to look for the changes in the frames from the beginning and the end of the book. So you've got to notice not only the similarities, because that's how you notice that it's a frame to begin with, but then what you need to pay attention to are the subtle changes in the frame. The changes in framing are going to help you to understand the theme, or the author's comment on the human condition, or what the author's trying to say about all people. So if you think back to that chrysanthemum scene from the very beginning, the key differences are that in the beginning, you have the wording that says, Chrysanthemum thought her name was perfect. And if you notice the background of the setting, you'll notice that while it is a nice fall day and it looks beautiful out, there are some clouds in the sky. That might signal that there's going to be some cloudy times in her life before the end or the resolution. By the ending scene, the wording has changed just a little bit. Instead of she thought her name was perfect, it says Chrysanthemum knew her name was perfect. And in the scene, you can actually see that instead of clouds, they've been replaced by a rainbow, which indicates the storm has come and gone. All right, so some other ways to notice framing are to look at how flashbacks resolve. Flashbacks usually contain important information, so watch how the flashback changes from the beginning to the end of the scene. If at the end the flashback looks a little different or has resolution, that's the key that you want to focus on in terms of how it indicates theme. Also, you can look for setting. A character might start and end the story in the same setting, like a park, which is where the kite runner starts and ends. And then finally, you could look for the subtle changes in the frame. So similar in the beginning and in the end, but something about the frame has changed, like the difference between the clouds and the rainbow for Chrysanthemum. And that's it. We're going to cover this framing idea a little bit more carefully in class when I see you next week. So thanks so much and have a good weekend. I'm limited.